Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's, which is a pretty impactful day in a lot of ways, especially for us in the United States. Today's Midday CX Spark, and really, what we're doing with this CX Spark, which I think it's really important, is to let you know that our goal is to provide you relevant, meaningful, and important information that will impact the customer experience quickly. That's why we only broadcast for 15 minutes or less. We don't go over that because you need a CX Spark, not a CX Smolder. And the Customer Service Weekly is brought to you by PACE or powered by the PACE Association. I'm glad you're here. And I look forward to having this discussion with one of our senior contributors, Omar L. Harris. Omar, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Very happy to be here. Good to talk to you again.
Uh, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you because, I mean, for me, your depth, your perspective, your experience, I mean, you lay it all into your work, and I value it greatly. So I'm glad you're here. But today we're going to go ahead and, of course, get to the point because you're going to help us solve something today, right?
Yes, sir.
What are you going to help us solve?
So I'm going to help you basically talk about how servant leadership can impact the customer experience.
And then to do that, we're talking about a lot of particular things that we're dealing with right now. That is
Yes.
pandemic, election,
Yep.
Black Friday is coming up,
Yep.
Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday, which I think is critically important, and the overall holiday season. And that could
Yep.
cause a whole lot of shaking in the ground in regards to trust, which is, I think, what you really want to talk about today, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. Ultimately, it is all about trust. And one of the things that I advocate for is that if you want to improve the customer experience, you have to improve the employee experience. And that's where servant leadership principles really come into play. So, there's three things that I want to spark with you today in terms of your midday spark. So, if you want to improve your customer experience, the first thing is to make sure that you're inverting the organizational priorities back towards the customer. So, if you're looking at your workload and workflows and things like that right now, and you're not seeing the majority of these priorities linked back towards adding value to customers, it's time for you to step in and stand down and speak up and say, listen, we have these major events. We have the pandemic, we have Black Friday, we have Giving Tuesday, we have all these moments happening right now that are important for the customer. And we need to make sure that our priorities reflect our intention to add more value to the customers this season than in previous years. And so the customers need us right now more than ever. So let's reinvert our priorities back towards the customer and away from internal corporation nonsense. The second thing is, if you're hiring right now, you need to make sure that you're hiring people who are passionate about problem solving, right? So hiring people, not about just people who have high pedigree or work for sexy companies, but people who ultimately can prove to you in the interviewing process that they're very passionate about solving problems internally and for customers most specifically. And think about this, people who are representative of your customer base. So think about your customer base and make sure you have people on your team and in your organizations who are representative of that customer base, because you need those voices. You need to include all of those voices to make sure that you are having a comprehensive customer experience for your organization. And the last thing is building trust. So your job, once you've inverted the priorities back towards the customer, you've hired correctly and have problem solvers who want to or are passionate about driving value for the customer, then your job is to build trust with your stakeholders by making sure you are serving and supporting your colleagues every single day and removing barriers that will prevent them from being excellent and brilliant in front of the customer. So those are three things that I think are crucial right now as we move through the end of the year and into 2021.
Well, and as you're talking, though, Omar, I mean, for me, I'm starting to think about, hey, well, that's easy, done, right? I don't think that's the case. Uh,
No.
so oftentimes, I would dare to say we may have, you know, innocent, unknowing symptoms that we're actually experiencing, but may not have the clarity to say that. Well, it's really this that's causing that. What are
Right.
like maybe one or two top things that you see that are evidence of that missing trust element that a servant leader can actually impact?
Well, I think the number one element of that shows a lack of trust is invulnerability. People who don't or are afraid to fail, which means they're afraid to try, right? So if you see people who are afraid to step out of their comfort zones and are afraid to even articulate failings or mistakes, then probably the trust is not there either amongst the peers or with you as a leader. So you have to diagnose that very carefully, because that's as, invulnerability and false perfection is really, it means that people don't trust each other. They're not open. They're not trusting enough to be vulnerable with each other. And if your team is not vulnerable, then you don't have trust.
Okay, now that's okay. That's something that I have seen play out in a lot of different ways, and quite frankly, I've even done it myself. Meaning that when you have your team there and you're asking them for some suggestions, ideas, and things
Right.
like that, and you get nothing.
Nothing.
I mean, it's crickets. That
Yeah.
right there should tell you as a leader that there's something wrong with that. Isn't that true?
Exactly. That's what I call the stench of perfection. When you smell that stench, it's time to go down and figure out what's causing the smell. Like when you go in your kitchen, you smell that something bad, you got to go and dig and find what the source of that thing is so that you can eradicate it for once and for all. It could be one person, it could be someone bullying others on the team. It could be a number of dynamics. You need to understand that and diagnose that and get rid of it as fast as possible, because it will impede your path to progress.
Well, and I would dare to say, even if it's you, because I mean, for me, I know I have to be really careful that when people do give suggestions and ideas, that I don't receive it in a way by which it encourages, future collaboration or expansion upon that idea.
Right. Well, there are moments, right? So if you're truly brainstorming, then you gotta kind of greenhouse these ideas. You have to create a safe space for people to present their ideas, and don't start shooting down ideas as soon as they come out someone's mouth. Because I've seen this happen on my own teams where we're talking about trying to solve a problem. People are making suggestions, and other people are immediately, including myself, shooting those down because that's not going to work. And that makes people shut up and not want to try again. So I think that you need to create a safe space, allow for the collection of the ideas, harvest the ideas, and then you can get to, okay, let's do process of elimination, let's prioritize, let's discuss each one in turn. But don't limit people from communicating and including all their ideas right at the beginning, because then people will know that they have a safe space where they can communicate at least their thoughts, and they'll learn during the process that why their particular suggestion or the way they articulated it was not taken forward, but it won't be like shot down immediately once it comes out of their mouth, which is the worst thing you can do as a leader.
Oh, well, okay. So now that you get into that, I start thinking of one of the mistakes that we often make to even go down that path, and that is that we don't set an initial expectation.
Right.
And I think for us as leaders, we have to be really aware that if we don't communicate that expectation on the front end, we kind of get what we get.
Exactly, exactly. You remember, you're creating the culture constantly, and your people are mirroring your behaviors constantly. So if you're the kind of leader who's always fast paced, get to it. We don't have time for discussion or debate or really trying to go at problems in different ways. Then your people are going to reflect that value back to you, and you're not going to get everything you could have gotten from the organization, from the group in those meetings. You're going to have short, clipped meetings, but you're not going to really innovate as much as you possibly could innovate, and that's going to be a lack of your leadership in that particular instance.
Well, and also too, when you're talking, I start thinking of something that in the world of ideation and creative thought is the different ways that we think. And so they talk about divergent and convergent thinking.
Right.
And it's really important for leaders to understand the difference between the two, because I think this is often where things go off the rails or go astray. And it's like,
Right.
gosh, things just went way in left field and we spent 2 hours doing something and not accomplishing anything.
Right. Right.
That is, the divergent thinking, is really that whole pie in the sky. What are the possibilities? Is blow it out of the water and things that, you never even thought possible. And then
Yep.
you have to reel it in because you need to be able to execute. And that's where your convergent thinking comes into play. And
Right.
oftentimes people will not set that expectation and say, okay, now it's divergent thinking time. And we're going to spend X amount of time to divergent thinking. And then we're going to
Right.
take the best ideas from our divergent thinking and put it into a convergent thinking process because we got to take action, right?
Exactly. The other thing to keep in mind there as well is that not everybody is good at communicating ideas verbally. Some people are good at communicating, drawing their thoughts. Some people are good at, telling stories. So you have to also recognize that, once again, the servant leader is tapped into each of their individual teammates' styles. So they understand what is the best way they can communicate. I had people in my previous organizations who were really good at drawing or diagramming their thoughts. So we used to listen. While we're talking, you go diagram your thought, that you can articulate it back to us, because we know that you have some brilliance, but you need to get it down in a different way. So it's respecting the way people best communicate as well to get all the ideas on the table.
That's another great point. Sometimes you have to plant the seed and just leave it there and then come back later, right? Because even when you start talking about the brain and the way it works is, even when we're sleeping, it's solving problems without us knowing, right? It's the subconscious mind solving the problems for the conscious mind. And so sometimes you can't jump in it and expect people to deliver, those ideas. Sometimes you just say, okay, here, I'm setting the agenda for the next time that we get together, and I want you to think about, this, and this.
And also remember that one of your responsibilities as a leader is to develop these abilities in your staff. And so you may have the answer already walking into the meeting, but it's important that you don't give the answer. You go through the process of trying to herd the group towards the answer without giving the answer, because you shut down all creativity when you're always the source of all the answers. So you're the single source of truth in the meeting. People just are waiting for you to say, okay, we're going to do this and then no one comes with any thoughts towards contributing towards the progress or solving the problems.
Well, and then people may sit here and say, well, what are you guys talking about? How's this impacting the customer experience?
Well, it's all about customer experience, because hopefully, as I mentioned before, if your priorities are about the customer and you've hired people who are passionate about solving problems, and you have a trusting environment where people can have these conversations, then it's everything you're talking about, everything you're doing is to add value to the customer experience. So what you're discussing in these meetings and forums is about solving customer problems, and you're sparking ideas around how to solve those problems. And then you're going to prioritize that, and you're going to learn from past mistakes, failures. So guys, remember, we tried this before. How can we do that better this time? That's where you have the openness and the trust to say, we're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to build on our experience and learn from each iteration of what we're trying to do to add value to the customers. So these are fundamental things you have to do to really spark and improve your customer experience, especially now in the sprint to the end of the year.
Well, and another thing that we talked about before we started recording is, everything associated with what they call, the VUCA world that we're living in, which
Yes.
is the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and
Yeah.
the ambiguity.
Yeah.
I would dare to say that when you're talking about, improving the customer experience, when you're talking about, engaging, igniting, is that right now that's probably more vital than it's ever been.
Of course, and also you need multiple brains, because you have to come at problems from different angles, right? I mean, the more volatile something is, it's sort of like slowing down to go fast. So you have to recognize the road. I always say this to my team: we have to recognize the road that we're on. Sometimes you're on a flat road at midday, no one else on the highway, and you can really crank that thing up to 120 miles per hour. Sometimes you're on a winding road at night with one headlight and going up a mountain, and you've got to adjust when it's raining and it's foggy. You have to adjust your speed for the conditions which you're facing and your experience with those conditions. So if you've never done something before, you probably need to take it a little bit slower and learn and iterate. If you've done it before and it's like, this is something and it's old hat, listen, crank up the engine and go full speed ahead. So it's also recognizing what moment you're in and what kind of problem you're trying to solve, so that you can direct your team in a proper way.
Omar, I've had fun with you. Now, all of you who are watching or listening, you can actually get access to more insights from Omar, of course, at customerserviceweekly.org. But Omar, where else can they find you?
www.omarlharris.com is my hub for everything else. And if you're interested in reading some great books, you can find me on amazon.com as well.
Omar, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We wish you the very best. And to all of you, make sure that you take the insights that you learned here and go ignite that CX celebration and carry it forth all year long.